Hey guys, welcome to Science for Sleep. Today we're going to begin a slow, quiet journey towards some of the most remote places on Earth, places so isolated that even now, in an age of satellites and global maps, they remain almost untouched by human presence. Imagine this for a moment. You're standing at the edge of the known world, where maps begin to blur, where shipping routes thin out, and where the ocean stretches uninterrupted for thousands of kilometers. Somewhere out there, hidden by distance and danger, are islands that feel less like destinations and more like secrets, places the planet seems to have tucked away and forgotten. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight, and what time it is where you are. I love imagining these stories drifting across different corners of the world. Wherever you are, let the world slow down for a while, soften your gaze, let the hum of life around you fade, and gently drift with us into tonight's quiet exploration. Now, when we talk about hidden islands, we're not talking about lost continents or fantasy lands waiting to be rediscovered. These places are very real. They exist on modern maps. Satellites pass over them. Weather systems sweep across them. And yet, human presence there is either extremely rare or entirely forbidden. Some are isolated by sheer geography, surrounded by violent seas, vertical cliffs, or brutal weather. Others are protected by law, by culture, or by ethical boundaries we've learned not to cross. And some are simply so inhospitable that even survival becomes a short-term experiment rather than a permanent possibility. One of the most striking examples of this kind of isolation is a place whose name feels almost like a warning. Inaccessible Island. It sits in the South Atlantic Ocean, part of a tiny cluster of land known as Tristan da Cunha, often described as the most remote inhabited archipelago on Earth. And yet, even among these isolated islands, Inaccessible Island stands apart. The island rises abruptly from the ocean, its coastline guarded by towering cliffs that plunge straight into the sea. There are no gentle beaches here, no natural harbors, no welcoming coves. Waves crash relentlessly against rock walls, making landings dangerous even for experienced crews. For centuries, sailors passed nearby and did exactly what the name suggested, they stayed away. What makes this island particularly fascinating is not just its geography, but its role as a kind of time capsule. Because humans rarely reach it, the ecosystem on Inaccessible Island has evolved in relative peace. It's home to bird species found nowhere else on Earth, including the smallest flightless bird in the world, a tiny rail that lost the ability to fly because, for millions of years, it simply didn't need to. There were no land predators. No humans. No urgency to escape. In most parts of the world, flightlessness is a liability. Here, it became an advantage. The plants on the island tell a similar story. Dense grasses, mosses, and shrubs cover the plateau above the cliffs, shaped by wind and salt rather than agriculture or development. The landscape hasn't been cleared, paved, or divided. It exists much as it did long before humans began crossing oceans. For scientists, visiting Inaccessible Island is not a casual trip. Expeditions require careful planning, calm seas, and a narrow window of opportunity. Even then, landings can be cancelled at the last moment if conditions shift. Those who do make it ashore usually stay only briefly, documenting wildlife, collecting data, and leaving as little trace as possible. In many ways, the island functions as a control sample, a glimpse of what parts of the planet might look like without us. And that's a quiet but powerful thought. In a world where human influence is almost everywhere, in the air, the oceans, the soil, places like this remind us that Earth still has the ability to exist on its own terms. Life continues there without cities, without noise, without constant change driven by human needs. But isolation also comes with fragility. Because the ecosystem is so finely balanced, even small disturbances can have outsized effects. Introducing a single invasive species, a rat, a plant, an insect, could unravel evolutionary relationships built over millions of years. That's why access is so carefully controlled, and why preservation matters more here than curiosity. Inaccessible Island teaches us something subtle but profound. Not all mysteries are meant to be solved by stepping closer. Some are best understood from a respectful distance. As the ocean continues to batter its cliffs night after night, and seabirds circle above the windswept plateau, the island remains quietly unreachable, not as a challenge to conquer, but as a reminder that the planet is still larger, wilder, and more patient than we are. And as we drift onward in this journey, we'll encounter other islands that are hidden not just by geography, but by choice, places where isolation is not accidental, but fiercely defended. If Inaccessible Island is hidden by cliffs and storms, the next place on our journey is hidden by something far more deliberate, human will. Far out in the Bay of Bengal lies North Sentinel Island, a small, forested landmass surrounded by shallow reefs and turquoise water. From above, it looks almost inviting. Palm trees fringe the shore. The sea glows softly in the sunlight. But this is one of the most restricted places on Earth, and for a reason that has nothing to do with weather or terrain. North Sentinel Island is home to the Sentinelese, one of the last uncontacted tribes in the world. For tens of thousands of years, they have lived here in near total isolation. Long before satellites, before empires, before modern nations drew borders across oceans, the Sentinelese built a life that required nothing from the outside world. They hunt, fish, and gather. They build shelters from wood and leaves. They fashion tools and weapons using techniques passed down through countless generations. And most importantly, they have chosen, again and again, to remain alone. Whenever outsiders have attempted to approach the island, the response has been unmistakable. Arrows fired from the shore. Spears raised in warning. A clear message delivered without words: do not come closer. To modern eyes, this reaction can seem extreme. But from the Sentinelese perspective, it is deeply rational. Every recorded attempt at forced contact between isolated tribes and the outside world has carried devastating consequences. Diseases like influenza or measles, harmless to most people today, can wipe out entire populations with no immunity. Even well-intentioned encounters often end in tragedy, disruption, or cultural collapse. The Sentinelese appear to understand this instinctively, or perhaps through distant memory. Whatever the reason, their resistance has remained absolute. The Indian government, which technically administers the region, has taken the rare step of enforcing strict exclusion zones around the island. Boats are prohibited from approaching. Aircraft must keep their distance. Even scientists and anthropologists are barred from landing. In an age obsessed with exploration, documentation, and data, North Sentinel Island stands as a radical exception. We know very little about the Sentinelese. Their language is undocumented. Their belief systems are unknown. Even their population size is uncertain, estimated only through distant observation. And yet, they are not lost. They are not primitive. They are simply uninterested in being seen. From time to time, the modern world brushes up against their reality. After the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, a reconnaissance helicopter flew low over the island to check for survivors. Witnesses reported seeing a Sentinelese man emerge from the forest and fire arrows at the aircraft, alive, alert, and very much uninterested in assistance. It was a moment that quietly challenged assumptions. Here was a group of people who had survived a catastrophic natural disaster without warning systems, without emergency broadcasts, without outside help. Their knowledge of tides, terrain, and shelter, refined over thousands of years, had been enough. North Sentinel Island forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Progress is not a single, universal path. While much of the world measures success through expansion, connection, and technological growth, the Sentinelese have chosen continuity instead. Stability, familiar rhythms, a life shaped by the island and nothing else. There is something deeply unsettling and deeply calming about that idea. Unsettling, because it reminds us that our globalized world is not inevitable. Calming, because it proves that other ways of being, quieter, slower, more rooted, are still possible. As night falls over the Bay of Bengal, the fires of the Sentinelese flicker beneath the forest canopy, unseen by satellites and untouched by headlines. The island remains silent, not because it has nothing to say, but because it has chosen not to speak. And as we move forward, we'll encounter another island, one not guarded by people or laws, but by sheer emptiness itself. A place so remote that even isolation feels isolated. After an island protected by human resolve, we now drift toward a place protected by something far colder and far more indifferent, distance itself. In the vastness of the South Atlantic Ocean, far from shipping lanes and human memory, lies Bouvet Island. It is often described as the most remote island on Earth, and that description is not poetic exaggeration. Bouvet Island sits thousands of kilometers from the nearest inhabited land, surrounded by some of the roughest seas on the planet. If isolation had a physical form, it might look like this. From the air, Bouvet appears as a dark, jagged mass rising abruptly from the ocean, its edges wrapped in ice and cloud. Over 90% of the island is covered by glacier. What little bare rock exists is steep, unstable, and constantly reshaped by wind, snow, and volcanic forces beneath the surface. This is not an island that invites visitors. Bouvet Island is technically Norwegian territory, though Norway itself lies unimaginably far away. No one lives here. No indigenous culture ever developed. There are no shelters, no trails, no harbors. Even landing a helicopter is a challenge, often made impossible by sudden weather shifts and swirling fog. And yet, despite its hostility, the island has drawn human attention, not because it offers comfort, but because it represents an extreme. Bouvet Island is volcanic in origin, born from the slow tearing and shifting of tectonic plates along the mid-Atlantic ridge. Its existence is the result of forces operating far below the ocean floor, long before humans ever looked outward with curiosity. The island is young in geological terms, still restless, still changing. Occasionally, scientists brave the journey to study its glacier, its volcanic structure, and the life that somehow persists there. These expeditions are rare and brief. Researchers arrive, collect data and leave as quickly as conditions allow. Because survival here is not a long-term option. There are no land mammals on Bouvet Island, no reptiles, no permanent insects. Life clings to the margins in the form of seabirds, seals, and hardy microorganisms that tolerate freezing temperatures and violent winds. Penguins gather along the icy shoreline, their colonies appearing almost surreal against the black volcanic rock and white ice. In these moments, the island feels less like land and more like a fragment of another planet. The weather is relentless. Winds can exceed hurricane strength without warning. Temperatures rarely rise above freezing. Visibility can drop to nothing in minutes. The ocean surrounding the island is infamous among sailors, with towering waves driven by the uninterrupted fetch of the Southern Ocean. It is no accident that Bouvet remains largely untouched. Even in the age of modern navigation, it resists us. And yet, the island holds one of the quietest reminders of human presence imaginable. In 1964, a small, automated weather station was installed on Bouvet Island. It transmitted data for a short time and then fell silent. When scientists returned years later, they found the station destroyed, likely crushed by ice or swept away by the elements. No vandalism. No sabotage. Just nature reclaiming the space. There is also a lingering mystery associated with the island, an abandoned lifeboat discovered in 1964, resting improbably on the shore. No shipwreck was found nearby. No records clearly explained how it arrived there. The boat showed signs of exposure but no clear story. It was a fleeting human question mark in a place that offers no answers. Bouvet Island teaches a different lesson than the islands before it. Where North Sentinel Island shows us isolation as a choice, Bouvet Island shows isolation as an outcome, the result of geography, climate, and scale beyond human negotiation. No one is forbidden from living here. There are no laws keeping people away. There is simply no realistic way to stay. And that distinction matters. It reminds us that not all places on Earth are meant to host us. Some exist outside our rhythms entirely, governed by forces that neither notice nor accommodate human ambition. Standing, or rather, imagining yourself standing, on Bouvet Island, there is a sense of profound smallness. The wind erases sound. The horizon dissolves into mist. The ice creaks and shifts with slow, unstoppable pressure. Time stretches differently here, measured not in days or years, but in geological patience. In a world increasingly shaped by human presence, Bouvet Island remains stubbornly indifferent. It does not care if it is mapped or studied. It does not care if it is remembered. It simply exists, a frozen monument to the idea that Earth still has corners where humanity is optional. As we continue our journey, we'll move from this icy solitude to a place that feels equally alien, but in a completely different way, an island where life didn't just survive isolation, but transformed into something almost unrecognizable. After the frozen indifference of Bouvet Island, our journey drifts toward a place that feels warm, ancient, and almost unreal, an island where life seems to have taken a creative detour. Floating in the Arabian Sea, between Africa and the Middle East, lies Socotra. From space, it looks like a fragment of another world accidentally dropped into Earth's oceans. From the ground, it feels even stranger. Socotra is often called the most alien-looking place on the planet, and that reputation is not exaggerated. Roughly 1/3 of all plant life on the island exists nowhere else on Earth. These species evolved in near total isolation for millions of years, shaped by harsh winds, intense sunlight, and long dry seasons. Cut off from surrounding continents, life here followed its own rules. The most iconic symbol of Socotra is the dragon's blood tree. Its umbrella-shaped canopy spreads wide against the sky, casting circular shadows on the ground below. When its bark is cut, a deep red resin seeps out, once believed to be the literal blood of dragons. Ancient traders prized this resin for medicine, dye, and ritual use, spreading stories of the island's strange powers across the ancient world. Walking through Socotra feels less like hiking and more like stepping into a forgotten evolutionary experiment. Trees grow with swollen trunks, storing water like living reservoirs. Plants twist and branch in unexpected ways, as if responding to invisible forces. Even the air feels different, dry, salty, and heavy with heat. The landscape shifts constantly, from limestone plateaus to white sand beaches to jagged mountains rising abruptly from the plains. Despite its beauty, Socotra has never been an easy place to inhabit. Freshwater is scarce. Soil is thin. Cyclones periodically batter the coastline. For centuries, the people of Socotra lived semi-nomadic lives, adapting carefully to the island's limits rather than trying to reshape them. Fishing, herding, and small-scale agriculture became acts of balance rather than control. And because large-scale development never took hold, the island remained remarkably intact. This isolation turned Socotra into a biological time capsule. Scientists often compare it to the Galapagos Islands, but Socotra's separation from major landmasses lasted even longer. Some of its species trace their lineage back to ancient supercontinents, survivors of geological changes that erased their relatives elsewhere. Animals here are quieter than the plants, but no less unique. Reptiles adapted to rocky heat. Birds that nest among cliffs and alien-looking trees. Insects found nowhere else, completing ecological relationships that exist only within this small island system. Yet Socotra's strangeness is not purely natural. For thousands of years, sailors navigating the Indian Ocean used the island as a waypoint. Myths accumulated. Stories blurred fact and fantasy. To some, Socotra was a land of sorcery and healing. To others, it was a place where monsters lived beyond the edge of the known world. Those stories, though exaggerated, served a purpose. They kept outsiders cautious. They preserved distance. In modern times, Socotra has gained recognition as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, praised for its unmatched biodiversity. But recognition also brings risk. Increased attention means increased pressure, tourism, infrastructure, and the slow creep of change. Socotra stands at a fragile crossroads. It shows us what happens when life is allowed to evolve without interruption, how strange, resilient, and beautiful the results can be. But it also reminds us how easily such balance can be undone. One invasive species. One poorly planned road. One shift in climate patterns. Unlike Bouvet Island, Socotra is not hostile to human life. And unlike North Sentinel Island, it is not closed by force. Its future depends on restraint. As night settles over the island, the silhouettes of dragon's blood trees stretch across the ground, their shapes softened by moonlight. The wind carries the distant sound of waves, and the faint rustle of leaves evolved to survive a different kind of world. Socotra whispers a quiet warning that uniqueness is not loud and survival is not guaranteed. And from here, we'll move toward another island where life doesn't just survive in isolation, but moves together in numbers so vast they turn the land itself into motion. From an island shaped by ancient isolation, we now drift toward a place where life doesn't hide quietly, it moves. All at once. In numbers so large they seem almost impossible. In the eastern Indian Ocean, just south of Indonesia, lies Christmas Island. For most of the year, it appears calm and unassuming. Dense rainforest covers much of the land. Sea cliffs ring the coastline. The beaches are narrow, often framed by coral and rock. Nothing about it immediately suggests spectacle. Until the rains arrive. Every year, usually between October and December, something extraordinary begins to unfold. As the wet season approaches, the island's interior stirs. Tiny movements ripple through the forest floor. And then, almost as if responding to a silent signal, millions upon millions of red crabs begin to migrate. Not hundreds, not thousands, but tens of millions. They emerge from burrows, from under leaves, from hidden crevices in the forest, and begin a slow, determined march toward the sea. Roads turn red. Trees appear to move at their bases. The ground itself seems alive. For days, sometimes weeks, Christmas Island is transformed into a living river of crustaceans. This migration is one of the largest and most synchronized animal movements on Earth. Each crab follows the same ancient directive: reach the ocean to reproduce. Female crabs release their eggs into the surf, timing it precisely with tidal cycles and lunar phases. If the timing is wrong, the next generation won't survive. And somehow, year after year, the timing is nearly perfect. Scientists still don't fully understand how the crabs coordinate this movement so precisely. Rainfall plays a role, cooling and moistening the environment to prevent dehydration. The moon influences tides. But the internal biological clock guiding millions of individuals to move together remains partly mysterious. What's remarkable is not just the scale of the migration, but how the island has adapted to it. Humans didn't always plan for the crabs. In the past, vehicles crushed them in enormous numbers. Roads became lethal obstacles. Over time, however, the island changed its behavior. Roads are now closed during peak migration. Special crab bridges and tunnels have been built to allow safe passage. Even daily routines slow down. For a brief period each year, the island belongs entirely to the crabs. This coexistence offers a rare example of humans choosing accommodation over control. Instead of trying to stop the migration, they step aside. The island's rhythm bends to an older, deeper schedule, one written long before modern infrastructure. Ecologically, the red crabs are more than just a spectacle. They are engineers of the ecosystem. By consuming leaf litter, they shape forest growth. By burrowing, they aerate the soil. Their absence would fundamentally alter the island's balance. And when the migration ends, the island exhales. The forests grow quiet again. Roads reopen. The ocean carries billions of crab larvae away, most of which will never return. Only a tiny fraction will survive, drifting for weeks before finding their way back to land. That survival rate may seem impossibly low. And yet, the migration has persisted for thousands of years. Christmas Island reminds us that abundance can be as fragile as rarity. A disruption to rainfall patterns, a shift in ocean chemistry, an introduced predator. Any one of these could break a cycle that feels timeless, but isn't guaranteed. As night falls during migration season, the island takes on an otherworldly stillness. Moonlight glints off ridge shells. The sound of movement replaces silence. The land breathes, slowly and collectively. From here, we'll move to an island where life is not just abundant, but dangerously concentrated, a place so hostile that humans have been told, quite clearly, not to come at all. After an island overtaken by life in overwhelming numbers, we now approach a place where life has concentrated into something far more threatening, an island where danger is not hidden, but everywhere. Off the coast of Brazil, rising abruptly from the Atlantic, lies Ilha da Queimada Grande. Its official name sounds almost ordinary, but its reputation is anything but. This is the island most people know simply as Snake Island. From a distance, it looks lush and green, wrapped in dense Atlantic forest and surrounded by clear blue water. There are no visible warning signs from afar. No smoke. No barren land. Nothing to suggest that stepping onto its shores would be a profound mistake. And yet, humans are forbidden from landing here. The reason is simple and unsettling. Ilha da Queimada Grande has one of the highest densities of venomous snakes anywhere on Earth. In some areas, estimates suggest there may be one snake for every square meter of land. They hang from branches, coil in rock crevices, and slide silently through the undergrowth. The most infamous resident is the golden lancehead pit viper, a species found nowhere else in the world. Isolated on this island thousands of years ago by rising sea levels, the lancehead evolved under unusual pressure. With no land mammals to hunt, it adapted to prey almost exclusively on birds. To do this effectively, its venom became extraordinarily potent, fast-acting enough to kill a bird before it could fly away and escape over the ocean. That venom is estimated to be several times stronger than that of its mainland relatives. For humans, a bite can be catastrophic. There is no permanent human presence on the island. No villages. No research stations. The only structure is an old, abandoned lighthouse, once tended by keepers who lived in isolation, and were eventually removed for safety. Today, the lighthouse is automated, its light blinking over an island no one is meant to enter. The Brazilian government strictly controls access, allowing only rare scientific expeditions under heavy supervision. Even these visits are brief. Researchers wear protective gear, move cautiously, and never forget that help is far away. What's fascinating is that the snakes are not aggressive by nature. They do not hunt humans. They do not swarm intruders. They simply exist, occupying every ecological niche available to them in a closed system where competition shaped extreme specialization. In this way, Snake Island is not a horror story, but a lesson in evolution. When life is isolated long enough, it adapts with ruthless efficiency. Traits that would be excessive elsewhere become essential here. The island did not become dangerous by intention. It became dangerous by necessity. And that necessity leaves no room for us. Ilha da Queimada Grande forces us to confront a reality we often prefer to ignore, that nature does not design itself for human comfort. Some places are not hostile because we are unwelcome. They are hostile because we are irrelevant. At night, beneath the canopy, the island becomes almost impossibly quiet. Snakes coil and rest, conserving energy. Birds, if they land at all, do so briefly and carefully. The forest holds its breath. No footsteps. No voices. Only the slow, watchful persistence of life perfectly adapted to its limits. From here, we'll move to another isolated place, one where danger gives way to purity, and where an untouched marine world quietly reveals what the oceans once looked like everywhere. After the silent tension of Snake Island, our journey softens. The danger recedes, replaced by something rare in the modern world: purity. Far out in the central Pacific Ocean, almost perfectly forgotten by global traffic, lies Palmyra Atoll. From above, it looks like a delicate ring of green and sand floating in endless blue. A coral necklace set gently on the surface of the sea. Palmyra is not dramatic in the way volcanoes are dramatic. It does not threaten. It does not repel. Instead, it quietly preserves. Palmyra Atoll is one of the most pristine coral reef ecosystems remaining on Earth. There are no resorts here. No cruise ships. No permanent population. Human access is tightly controlled, limited almost entirely to scientists and conservation teams. And because of that, something extraordinary has been allowed to continue. The reef is alive in a way that feels almost prehistoric. Sharks dominate the ecosystem here, not as apex monsters, but as essential regulators. In most coral reefs around the world, sharks have been overfished, their absence triggering cascading ecological collapse. At Palmyra, sharks are abundant, healthy, and fully integrated into the system. Fish populations are balanced. Coral growth is dense and resilient. Algae do not overrun the reef. Everything exists in a state that scientists describe as baseline, a glimpse of what tropical oceans looked like before industrial fishing and pollution. Swimming through Palmyra's waters is often described as disorienting. Not because of danger, but because of abundance. Fish move in thick, shimmering schools. Colors are richer than expected. The reef structure is complex, layered, and alive with sound, the clicking of crustaceans, the distant movement of larger animals, the subtle hum of a functioning ecosystem. On land, Palmyra feels equally untouched. Coconut palms sway gently. Seabirds nest in enormous numbers, their calls rising and falling with the wind. There are remnants of human history, rusting World War II structures slowly being reclaimed by vines and salt air, but even these feel temporary. Nature is clearly in charge here. Palmyra's isolation protected it from large-scale development, but it also made it vulnerable in another way. During the war, invasive species like rats were accidentally introduced, devastating bird populations. Only through careful, deliberate conservation efforts were these invasions reversed. The recovery that followed was astonishing. As seabirds returned, they brought nutrients from the ocean back to the land. Their droppings enriched the soil. Plants grew stronger. Insects multiplied. The island's entire food web reassembled itself, piece by piece, once the pressure was removed. Palmyra teaches a gentle but powerful lesson. Nature remembers. Given time, space, and protection, ecosystems can heal. They can regain balance. They can become vibrant again, not perfectly, not instantly, but steadily. In a world often dominated by narratives of loss and decline, Palmyra stands as quiet evidence of resilience. it doesn't deny damage. It simply shows what recovery looks like when we step back instead of pushing forward. As evening settles over the atoll, the lagoon darkens to deep blue. The surface of the water smooths. Beneath it, life continues its intricate choreography, unseen but uninterrupted. From here, we'll leave the calm of the tropics and rise toward something far more vertical, a place where life clings to sheer rock, high above the sea, in one of the most improbable refuges on Earth. From the gentle balance of Palmyra's reefs, our journey now tilts sharply upward, away from lagoons and coral, toward bare rock rising almost vertically from the sea. In the Tasman Sea, between Australia and New Zealand, stands Ball's Pyramid. From a distance, it barely looks like an island at all. More like a colossal shard of stone driven straight up from the ocean floor. Ball's Pyramid is the tallest volcanic sea stack on Earth, a narrow spine of basalt soaring over 500 meters above the waves. There are no beaches here. No forests. No gentle slopes. Just sheer cliffs, sharp ridges, and constant wind. For a long time, it seemed impossible that anything could live here. The rock is a remnant of an ancient volcano that erupted millions of years ago, part of the same system that created nearby Lord Howe Island. Over time, erosion stripped away almost everything, leaving behind this dramatic, skeletal core. What remains is exposed, unstable, and relentlessly battered by salt spray and storms. Human access is extremely limited. Landing requires calm seas, precise timing, and expert climbing skills. Even then, reaching the upper ledges is dangerous, and staying for long is nearly impossible. Which is why what was discovered here came as such a profound shock. In 2001, scientists exploring Ball's Pyramid found a small population of insects living in a narrow crevice high on the rock face. These were not ordinary insects. They were Dryococelus australis, commonly known as the Lord Howe Island stick insect, sometimes nicknamed the tree lobster because of its size and appearance. For decades, this species had been declared extinct. Originally native to Lord Howe Island, the insects were wiped out after rats were accidentally introduced in the early 20th century. Despite searches, no survivors were found. The species was written off as another quiet casualty of human activity. Until Ball's Pyramid. Clinging to a single patch of vegetation in a near-vertical crack, a tiny group had survived unnoticed, isolated not just from humans, but from almost every other form of life. Their refuge was so inaccessible that even predators couldn't reach them. It was survival by improbability. The environment they lived in was extreme. Limited food. Little shelter. Constant exposure to wind and salt. And yet, they persisted. Generation after generation, holding on in a place where extinction seemed inevitable. When scientists realized what they had found, the discovery changed the narrative. Instead of extinction, there was hope. Carefully, without removing all individuals, conservationists began a captive breeding program. The goal was not exploitation, but restoration, to one day return the species to its original home, once invasive threats were removed. Ball's Pyramid thus became more than a geological oddity. It became a symbol. A reminder that life can endure in the narrowest margins. That extinction is not always final. And that sometimes, survival depends not on strength or dominance, but on finding the one place no one else can reach. Standing beneath the rock, or imagining it, there is a sense of vertigo. The ocean crashes far below. Birds wheel in the updrafts. The stone itself feels ancient and indifferent. And yet, hidden within its cracks, life once found a way. As the sun lowers and shadows stretch across the water, Baal's pyramid casts a long silhouette, stark, solitary, and strangely hopeful. From this vertical refuge, our journey will now shift again, away from biological miracles and toward the weight of human history, where isolation did not protect life, but instead trapped it in tragedy. From a place where isolation saved life, we now move to an island where isolation did the opposite, a place where distance turned survival into a slow, quiet tragedy. In the eastern Pacific Ocean, far from regular shipping routes and national attention, lies Clipperton Island. At first glance, it seems almost insignificant, a low coral atoll, a shallow lagoon, a thin ring of sand barely rising above the sea. And yet, this small island carries one of the most unsettling human stories ever recorded. Clipperton is often called a ghost island, not because it is haunted in the traditional sense, but because of what happened when people were left there and forgotten. The island was claimed by France in the 19th century, valued mainly for its guano, bird droppings rich in phosphate, once considered an important fertilizer. To maintain control, a small group of Mexican settlers and soldiers were stationed on the island in the early 1900s. Supplies were meant to arrive regularly by ship. But the world beyond Clipperton was changing. The Mexican Revolution disrupted supply lines. Ships stopped coming. Communication failed. And slowly, quietly, the people on Clipperton realized they were alone. At first, they rationed. They waited. They trusted that help would return. Months passed. Then years. Food became scarce. The lagoon water turned brackish and undrinkable. Scurvy spread, weakening bodies already strained by hunger and heat. One by one, the men, including the soldiers, began to die. Eventually, only one adult man remained. He took control. Accounts from the few survivors who were later rescued describe a descent into tyranny. The man declared himself king of the island. He controlled food, weapons, and access to what little safety remained. He abused the women who survived, ruling through fear in a place where there was nowhere to escape. Clipperton had become a prison without walls. The island's geography made escape impossible. The reef surrounding it was sharp and dangerous. The ocean beyond was vast and unforgiving. Even if someone reached the water, there was nowhere to go. Isolation, once merely inconvenient, became lethal. The nightmare ended only by chance. In 1917, an American ship happened upon the island. The crew discovered the remaining women and children, emaciated, traumatized, barely alive. The king had been killed shortly before their arrival, ending his reign only days before rescue. The survivors were taken away. Clipperton was abandoned once again. Today, the island is uninhabited. The lighthouse that once stood there is in ruins. Rusted debris lies half buried in sand. Seabirds nest where people once tried to build lives. The lagoon reflects the sky, indifferent to the suffering it witnessed. There is no memorial, no monument, no daily reminder of what happened here. And perhaps that is what makes Clipperton so haunting. It reminds us that isolation does not automatically protect. Without connection, without support, without accountability, even small communities can collapse into darkness. The same distance that preserves ecosystems can, under the wrong conditions, amplify the worst aspects of human behavior. As night falls over Clipperton Island, the wind moves freely across the sand. Waves break against the reef as they always have. The island does not remember, but the story remains. And from here, we'll travel northward, toward a cold, empty landscape where isolation was never meant to hold people at all, a place so alien that it has been used to prepare humans for life on another planet. From the haunted stillness of Clipperton, our journey now moves far north, away from tropical waters and into a landscape defined by cold, silence, and emptiness. In the Canadian Arctic, well above the tree line, lies Devon Island. It is the largest uninhabited island on Earth, a vast expanse of rock and ice where almost nothing grows and almost nothing moves. This is not an island shaped by storms or cliffs, but by absence. Devon Island is often called the Arctic Desert. Despite being surrounded by ice and snow, it receives very little precipitation. The air is dry. The soil is thin. The ground remains frozen beneath the surface year-round. Life here survives only in fragments, mosses clinging to stone, microscopic organisms enduring in frozen soil, the occasional polar bear passing through like a ghost. To stand here is to feel the world stripped down to its essentials. There are no cities, no roads, no permanent human settlements. The wind travels unhindered for kilometers. Sound carries strangely, then disappears. The sky feels enormous, pressing down on the land with quiet weight. And yet, Devon Island has played an unexpected role in humanity's imagination. Because parts of the island look astonishingly similar to Mars. The terrain is reddish-brown. Impact craters scar the surface. Vegetation is almost non-existent. When clouds move across the sky, shadows stretch over a landscape that feels eerily unearthly. It is this resemblance that drew the attention of scientists and space agencies. For years, Devon Island has been used as a testing ground for planetary exploration. Researchers have lived here temporarily, wearing simulated space suits, testing equipment designed for Mars missions. Rovers crawl across the rocky surface. Instruments probe the frozen ground, searching for microbial life, not because Devon Island is special in itself, but because it offers a realistic preview of what another world might demand of us. The irony is subtle but striking. To prepare for leaving Earth, humans practice on one of the few places on Earth that feels least hospitable to humans. And even here, presence is temporary. When research teams depart, they leave almost nothing behind. No infrastructure remains. The land quickly reclaims silence. Tracks in the soil fade under frost and wind. Devon Island returns to its default state, vast, empty, patient. There is something deeply calming about that. Devon Island does not resist us like Snake Island. It does not exclude us like North Sentinel Island. It simply does not need us. Its isolation is not dramatic. It is quiet and complete. The kind of isolation that stretches time, slows thought, and dissolves urgency. Days blend together. Night arrives slowly. The sun circles low on the horizon in summer, never fully setting, then disappears entirely in winter. For those who have spent time there, Devon Island often leaves a lasting impression, not of fear, but of perspective. It makes human concerns feel small, temporary, and oddly fragile. As the cold deepens and the wind continues its endless passage across stone and ice, Devon Island remains unchanged. It waits. Not for visitors, not for discovery, but simply because it has always waited. And from this stark, planetary emptiness, our journey will drift back toward the ocean, to a cluster of islands so remote and windswept that even their name suggests loneliness itself. From the barren stillness of the Arctic, our journey drifts south again, far south, toward an ocean so vast and restless that even isolation feels amplified. Scattered across the southern Indian Ocean lie the Kerguelen Islands, often called the Desolation Islands. The name is not metaphorical. It is descriptive. These islands sit thousands of kilometers from the nearest continent, battered constantly by wind, rain, and cold seas. Storm systems roll in one after another, rarely granting the land a moment of calm. The sky is almost always overcast. The ground is damp, uneven, and scarred by ancient volcanic activity. Trees do not grow here. Instead, the landscape is dominated by low grasses, mosses, and hardy shrubs pressed flat by relentless wind. Hills rise gently and then fall away into jagged coastlines, where waves crash endlessly against black rock. The ocean is never quiet. Despite their size, the archipelago is larger than many countries. The Kerguelen Islands have no permanent civilian population. Only rotating teams of scientists and support staff live here temporarily, housed in a small research base that feels more like an outpost than a settlement. And then there are the animals. Seals gather in enormous numbers along the shore, their calls echoing across the bays. Penguins waddle through the grass in dense colonies, indifferent to the weather that would drive humans indoors. Seabirds dominate the sky, riding air currents that never seem to rest. Curiously, there is also another presence here: sheep. Introduced by humans long ago, sheep roam freely across parts of the islands, grazing in a land where predators are absent and fences unnecessary. They are a quiet reminder of earlier attempts to make the islands economically useful, attempts that ultimately failed. The Kerguelen Islands were never meant to be tamed. Historically, they served as a waypoint for sealers and whalers, then later as a strategic location during wartime. During the Second World War, the surrounding waters were used by naval forces, and the islands briefly held military significance far beyond their lonely appearance. But once the wars ended, so did most reasons to stay. What remains today is a place defined by endurance rather than activity. Life here adapts not to abundance, but to constancy: constant wind, constant cold, constant motion. There is no dramatic seasonal transformation. No sudden bloom. No migration that turns the land into spectacle. Everything happens slowly. Time behaves differently on the Kerguelen Islands. Days blur together under grey skies. The absence of cities, traffic, and schedules stretches perception. Even thoughts seem to slow, pulled into rhythm with the wind and waves. For scientists, this makes the islands invaluable. They offer insight into climate patterns, ocean circulation, and ecological resilience in extreme isolation. But for most people, the appeal is something less tangible. The Kerguelen Islands represent a version of Earth that exists without invitation. They are not forbidden. They are not dangerous in a dramatic sense. They are simply uninterested in hosting us. As evening settles, mist drifts low over the hills. The cries of seabirds soften. The wind continues its tireless movement across land and sea. Lights glow faintly from the research station, a small, temporary signal of human presence in a place that will outlast it. From here, our journey will move one final time into human history, to a place where isolation bred not endurance or resilience, but fear, rumor, and lingering unease. From the windswept endurance of the southern oceans, our journey turns inward, toward a place much smaller in scale, yet heavy with memory. In the shallow waters of the Venetian lagoon lies Poveglia. From afar, it looks unremarkable. A low strip of land, a few crumbling buildings, trees growing unchecked where paths once existed. And yet, few islands in Europe are spoken of with as much unease. Poveglia is often called the haunted island of Venice, but the truth is quieter and far more unsettling than any ghost story. For centuries, this island served a purpose no one wanted to think about. When plague swept through Europe, Venice responded with isolation. Ships suspected of carrying disease were diverted. The sick were removed from the city. And Poveglia became a place of waiting, and often, of dying. Thousands of people were quarantined here. Some recovered. Many did not. The dead were burned in mass graves. Ash mixed with soil. Over time, it is said that a significant portion of the island's ground became human remains. Whether the numbers are exact or exaggerated, the result was the same. Poveglia absorbed suffering, quietly and repeatedly. When the plagues ended, the island did not return to normal life. Instead, it found a new role. In the early 20th century, Poveglia became the site of a psychiatric hospital. At the time, mental health care was poorly understood, and treatments were often experimental and cruel. Patients were isolated not just from society, but from compassion. Stories emerged, some documented, others whispered, of mistreatment, neglect, and invasive procedures carried out behind closed doors. Eventually, the hospital was abandoned. Official records are sparse. Closure came without ceremony. And the island was left behind once again. Today, Poveglia is officially closed to the public. No residents live there. Buildings decay slowly under ivy and salt air. Windows stare out over still water. Bells no longer ring. Unlike the islands we visited before, Poveglia's isolation is not enforced by cliffs, storms, or distance. It is enforced by memory. Locals avoid it. Fishermen steer clear. Tall boats pass at a distance. Not because anything happens there now, but because of what once did. There is something uniquely human about that kind of isolation. Nature reclaims the island easily. Plants grow. Birds nest. The lagoon moves gently around its edges. But human presence feels unwelcome, as if the land itself remembers what it was asked to hold. Poveglia reminds us that isolation is not always about protection or preservation. Sometimes, it is a response to pain, a collective decision to step away from a place that reflects our darker history. As dusk settles over the lagoon, the island fades into shadow. The water remains calm. Venice glows faintly in the distance, vibrant and alive. And between them, Poveglia rests, silent, untouched, and unresolved. From here, our journey will begin to slow. We'll step back from individual islands and reflect on what these hidden places reveal, not just about geography, but about ourselves. After walking through islands shaped by isolation, survival, danger, and memory, it's worth slowing down and looking at what they all share, despite their differences in climate, scale, and history. These hidden islands are not just remote locations on a map. They are mirrors. Each one reflects a different relationship between humans and the world around them. Some islands, like Inaccessible Island or Bouvet Island, show us what Earth looks like when we are mostly absent. Life there follows its own pace, shaped by wind, water, and time rather than schedules or economies. Nothing is optimized. Nothing is rushed. And yet, everything functions. Other islands, like North Sentinel Island, reveal something even more challenging: the idea that not every place needs to be known, documented, or connected. In a world built on visibility and access, choosing isolation can feel radical. But it is also a reminder that respect sometimes means restraint. Then there are islands like Christmas Island and Palmyra Atoll, where coexistence becomes possible, but only when humans are willing to adapt, slow down, and step aside. These places don't demand that we disappear entirely. They ask something quieter and harder: awareness. And finally, islands like Clipperton and Poveglia remind us that isolation can amplify human vulnerability. Without connection, accountability, or care, distance becomes dangerous. Geography alone does not decide whether isolation protects or harms; human choices do. What's striking is that none of these islands are hidden in the literal sense. Satellites can see them. Coordinates exist. Maps are precise. They are hidden because they resist integration into the modern rhythm of constant movement and consumption. They don't scale. They don't monetize easily. They don't reward intrusion. And so they remain on the edges of attention. In a way, these islands preserve a form of silence that is becoming rare. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of demand. They don't ask us to visit. They don't need our approval. They don't change faster because we're impatient. They simply continue. As you think about these places, it becomes clear that exploration doesn't always mean arrival. Sometimes it means understanding from a distance. Sometimes it means acknowledging that the most respectful way to engage with a place is to let it remain what it already is. This realization softens the journey. Instead of collecting destinations, we begin collecting perspectives. Instead of asking, "How do we get there?" we ask, "Why does this place matter, even without us?" And that question lingers. As we move toward the end of this quiet exploration, we'll bring these thoughts together, not to conclude them neatly, but to let them settle, the way islands themselves sit quietly in the ocean, unconcerned with being finished or explained. As our journey nears its end, the pace naturally slows. The islands we visited begin to feel less like distant locations and more like states of mind, reminders of how vast, varied, and patient this planet truly is. What stands out most is not how extreme these places are, but how consistent they remain. While human history is filled with rapid change, borders shifting, cities rising and falling, technologies replacing one another, these islands move at a different speed. Their timelines stretch beyond lifetimes, beyond generations. In some cases, beyond recorded memory. On Inaccessible Island, birds still nest where they always have. On Bouvet Island, ice still advances and retreats with quiet indifference. On Socotra, plants continue their strange, solitary evolution. These places are not frozen in time. They are simply unconcerned with ours. This contrast invites a gentler way of thinking. It suggests that progress does not always mean expansion, and understanding does not always require presence. There is wisdom in distance. There is value in leaving some spaces unoccupied, not because we cannot reach them, but because we choose not to. In many ways, these islands challenge one of humanity's oldest instincts, the urge to claim, to name, to map, to settle, to reshape. And yet, when we resist that urge, something unexpected happens. The world feels larger again, more mysterious, less exhausted. The hidden islands remind us that Earth is not a puzzle waiting to be solved, but a story still being told, one with chapters we may never read firsthand, and don't need to. As listeners, as observers, we are allowed to simply know they exist. That knowledge alone expands the imagination. It creates space for wonder without ownership, curiosity without consumption. And perhaps that is their quiet gift. They teach us how to be small in a way that feels comforting, not diminishing. How to exist within a world that does not revolve around us, and never has. As the ocean continues its endless motion around these islands, and the wind traces familiar paths across their surfaces, they remain where they are, steady, patient, and unbothered. And in their stillness, they offer something rare: perspective. As we reach the final stretch of this journey, the islands begin to blend together, not as individual locations, but as a collective reminder of something deeper. These hidden places exist at the edges of attention, not because they lack significance, but because significance does not always announce itself loudly. Some of the most important stories on Earth unfold without witnesses, without headlines, without applause. And that's okay. The islands we've explored don't ask to be understood completely. They don't need to be visited, photographed, or shared. Their value is not measured in accessibility or usefulness. It exists simply because they are part of the planet's quiet integrity. In a world increasingly shaped by speed, connection, and constant presence, these islands offer an alternative rhythm, one built on patience, limits, and acceptance. They remind us that not everything needs to be touched to be meaningful. Not every mystery needs to be solved. Not every place needs us. There is peace in that realization. As you rest here, listening, perhaps your own thoughts begin to slow as well. The idea of distance no longer feels empty. Instead, it feels spacious, protective, calm. These islands will remain long after this story ends. Long after the ocean rearranges its currents. Long after human attention moves on to something new. And in that continuity, there is reassurance. The world is still capable of holding places untouched by urgency. And so, as this exploration gently fades, allow that sense of scale to settle in. Let the vastness of the planet do some of the work for you, carrying your thoughts outward, thinning them, softening them, until they no longer feel heavy. Now, let everything slow even further. Picture one of these islands, any one you like. See it at night. The ocean around it dark and steady. The wind moving gently, without purpose. No lights. No schedules. No voices. Just presence. Your breathing can follow that rhythm. In, slow and unforced. Out, calm and complete. There is nothing you need to do here. no conclusions to reach, no ideas to hold on to. Like these islands, you are allowed to exist without performing, without proving, without moving. Thoughts may still pass by, like distant waves. Let them. You don't have to follow them. They can come and go on their own. Somewhere far away, tides are shifting. Clouds are drifting. Forests are resting. And you are part of that same quiet system, connected, but not required to act. As the night deepens, imagine the map of the world gently dimming. The hidden islands remain, but their edges soften. They become silhouettes, then impressions, then calm awareness. Stay here as long as you like. And when sleep comes, let it arrive the way these islands have always existed, naturally, patiently, without force.